Year 536.
Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the sun simply doesn't shine the way it used to. That's exactly what happened in the year 536. People at the time reported that the sky was covered by a strange kind of haze that blocked the sunlight. For months, even years, the days seemed constantly cloudy, cold, and lifeless. Some chroniclers even said the sun looked like a faint moon, weak and dim, as if it had lost its brightness. Today, scientists believe this was caused by a massive volcanic eruption, likely in Iceland. This eruption released so much ash and dust into the atmosphere that the sun was partially blocked. With less sunlight, Earth's temperature dropped significantly. In some regions, there was even snow during the summer. The result? Crops failed, plants died, and a major food crisis began. And it wasn't an isolated event. Evidence suggests that other eruptions may have followed shortly after, making the situation even worse. It was as if the planet had been trapped in a prolonged winter. Rivers froze, seasons became unpredictable, and people could no longer tell when to plant or harvest. And things only got worse. With not enough food, many people died of starvation. Others became weaker, making it easier for diseases to spread. A few years later, the so-called Plague of Justinian emerged, an epidemic that killed millions and spread rapidly through already weakened cities. This period was so devastating that many historians consider the year 536 to mark the beginning of one of the worst eras in human history. It was cold, dark, without food, and full of disease. For those who lived through it, it truly felt like the end of the world.
Year 1315.
Between 1315 and 1317, Europe faced one of the worst periods of famine ever recorded. It all began with constant and intense rainfall. It rained so much that the fields became waterlogged, and crops simply rotted before they could grow. In some regions, unseasonal cold made things even worse, destroying whatever little managed to survive. Without harvests, there was no food, and without food, prices skyrocketed. Bread, a basic staple for the population, became too expensive for many people. Entire families began to starve, and even those with some money struggled to find food available. The situation became so extreme that there are reports of people eating dead animals, roots, and things that normally wouldn't be considered food. In the most desperate cases, there are even stories of cannibalism. There are also records of people abandoning their lands and wandering in search of anything to survive, which only increased the chaos in towns and villages. On top of that, hunger weakened the population, making it easier for diseases to spread. Many people died not only from starvation, but also from infections and health complications. Children and the elderly were especially affected, as they had less resistance. This period deeply shook European society. The population declined, the economy collapsed, and trust in authorities and the church was weakened. Many began to question whether this was a divine punishment or simply the collapse of a system unable to handle such a massive crisis.
Year 1347.
Between 1347 and 1351, Europe was devastated by the Black Death, an extremely deadly disease caused by bacteria transmitted by fleas on rats. It is believed to have reached Europe through trade routes, especially via ships coming from Asia, carrying not only goods but also the disease. The illness spread rapidly. A healthy person could fall sick and die within just a few days. The symptoms were horrifying. High fever, intense pain, dark spots on the skin, and painful swellings on the body known as buboes. In many cases, victims didn't even have time to understand what was happening. It is estimated that about 1/3 of Europe's population died during this period, with some studies suggesting up to half in certain regions. In some cities, almost no one survived. Streets were filled with bodies, and there were often not enough people left to bury the dead. Mass graves became common, and the smell of death spread throughout entire cities. Fear took over everything. People didn't understand what was happening and believed it was a divine punishment. Others looked for someone to blame, which led to the persecution of innocent groups. Many fled the cities trying to escape the disease, but ended up spreading it even further without realizing it. In addition, doctors at the time had no real understanding of how to treat the disease. Some used strange or ineffective methods, and figures like plague doctors appeared, wearing masks with beak-like shapes filled with herbs in an attempt to protect themselves.
Year 1816,
The year 1816 became known as the year without a summer, and it's not an exaggeration. In the middle of summer, it snowed in parts of Europe and North America. In other regions, unexpected frosts destroyed crops overnight, as if the seasons had completely lost control. All of this happened because of the eruption of Mount Tambora in 1815. It was one of the largest eruptions in history. The amount of ash released into the atmosphere was so massive that it formed a kind of veil around the planet, reflecting sunlight back into space and dimming the skies for months. With less sunlight, temperatures dropped, crops didn't grow properly, and once again, a food crisis emerged. In some places, entire harvests were lost multiple times in a row, which caused food prices to skyrocket and left thousands of people without access to basic necessities. Without food, many were forced to migrate to other regions in search of better conditions. Poverty increased, diseases spread, and even riots began to break out. In some cities, looting and protests occurred, driven by the population's desperation. During this period that the writer Mary Shelley created the story of Frankenstein, inspired by the dark, cold, and eerie atmosphere of the time.
year 1918,
In 1918, the world faced one of the deadliest pandemics in history, the Spanish flu. It emerged at the end of World War I and spread rapidly across the globe, fueled by the movement of troops and people between countries. The virus was extremely contagious. In a short time, millions of people were infected. The most frightening part was that many healthy young adults also died, which is unusual for influenza. In many cases, the disease progressed aggressively, attacking the lungs and causing severe breathing difficulties. Hospitals became overcrowded, and there was a shortage of doctors and resources. In some places, schools, churches, and even gyms were turned into makeshift hospitals. Masks began to be widely used, and some cities even banned public gatherings in an attempt to slow the spread. Fear was constant, and many families lost multiple members within just a few days. It is estimated that around 50 million people died, with some studies suggesting even higher numbers. This was an enormous toll, especially considering the global population at the time, making it one of the most devastating pandemics ever recorded.
year 1945,
1945 marked the end of World War II, but it didn't bring immediate relief. On the contrary, it was a year filled with destruction and fear. When the fighting ended, what remained was a deeply shaken world. Cities were in ruins, millions of people had died, and many others were left homeless. Europe and parts of Asia were devastated. In some places, there was a shortage of everything: food, water, and shelter. Survivors had to deal not only with the loss of loved ones, but also with the challenge of starting over from nothing. This was the year when atomic bombs were used in the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The destructive power of these weapons shocked the entire world. Entire cities were wiped out in seconds, and the effects of radiation continued to kill long after the explosions. Another major turning point was the revelation of the horrors of Nazi concentration camps. When troops arrived at these sites, the world began to understand the scale of the atrocities committed during the war, which deeply shocked the international community. Even with the war over, a new period of tension began, the Cold War. The world became divided between two superpowers, and the fear of nuclear war became part of everyday life.